I think Nicolas Hayek is one of the most impactful people in the watchmaking industry in the past 30 years, and let me tell you why. Imagine the Swiss watch industry was an 18-wheeler on the highway. So this was this great big 18-wheeler going full force, living life on the highway, and then there's a sharp curve. And this sharp curve is a quartz crisis where, you know, this new technology comes up, this big 18-wheeler of an industry is just like honed in on like what they do. Is like, hey, we do it the best. We're known for being the best out there. Everybody knows Swiss watches are the best, the most accurate, everything. So this 18-wheeler is just going down the road, and like everybody's like, hey, this curve is there. Are we gonna slow down? Are we gonna press the brakes a little bit? And like, why would we press the brakes? We're the big 18-wheeler. Nobody will ever be able to stop what we do. And then the 18-wheeler hits the curve and it goes over a cliff. And now it's in a free fall. The Swiss watch industry doesn't know what's going on. The consumers love electronic watches. Brands like Seiko and Citizen in Japan are using quartz technology, and everybody's like, you know, it's like the 70s, like, oh, it's digital, it's new, it's fresh. So then you have this big 18-wheeler literally falling off a cliff, and everybody's just like, what do we do now? You know, everything starts to shake. A whole, you know, economy, a force is kind of being shaken up there. And there you have, you know, Nicolas Hayek, who's this Lebanese engineer, businessman, very charismatic guy. And, you know, he really is presented an interesting opportunity. A lot of these brands, because they were losing money, they weren't able to sell their products, they were in debt with a lot of big banks. So around like the early 1980s, a lot of Swiss watch companies were owned by banks because just out of defaulted loans and they can't pay back things, and banks ended up owning these, you know, these watch companies. These banks don't know anything about how watch companies work, and they go to Nicolas Hayek. Nicolas Hayek, you know, kind of discusses with them, you know, there's something to save here. We can turn around these businesses. So what he did was he did a survey of the two businesses and tried to really figure out what's going on here. And one of the big things that he found out was that these two big groups that held all these brands, everybody was running independently of each other. You know, at the end of the day, the bills come back to the same place, but everybody has their own marketing department, everybody has their own manufacturing situation, everybody has their own supply line. So you have 100 different companies doing 100 different things, all feeling the effect of this cliff that we just ran over with the 18-wheeler, and we're just kind of falling, right? So he goes in there and he says, hey, we need to centralize what's going on. No longer can we think how we were thinking 10, 15, 20 years ago. We have to kind of modernize how we move. So he kind of disrupted, you know, those companies. The biggest pivot that he was able to do to kind of spark the whole move was the Swatch watch. Now, what is so important about the Swatch watch? First of all, it was, you know, a quartz timepiece, right? It was actually developed by one of these groups, I think ASUAG, had to develop for something called the slimline watch. And it was a slimline movement. It was a movement that took 51 parts. It was quartz, 51 parts compared to like 100 or so parts from every other watches out there. It was, you know, a little bit cheaper to make, and they were gonna sell these to other brands. What Nick Hayek said is like, hey, let's actually take this and make it our own thing. And he made it the Swatch watch. A $40 watch came in a plastic case. It was fun, it was funky. You were able to do so many different designs because it was so cheap, so you could really have fun. And if you go back historically in some of the Swatch watches that existed, there's like bacon and egg watches and like so many, because they're just having fun, and there was like, hey, any designer, you wanna make a design for us, let's have fun with Swatch. So the Swatch watch comes out, it's a hit, people are loving it. He decided, instead of focusing on the high end of the market, let's go where the consumers are right now. So he went down there with the Swatch watch in a lower price point. People ate it up because it was a quartz watch. It was a really cool design watch, very fun watch, but it was 100% Swiss-made watch. And that is what he wanted to get across to the world, is that while there are other brands other countries who make nice watches, Switzerland is still the home of innovation, and Switzerland is still the home of you know, great watches and great design and great concepts. And while the Swatch becomes this kind of fun, funky watch, one thing that he always talked about is no matter how funky the designs was, the Swatch really started as a functional new innovation of a 51-part movement. And on that foundation of innovation, he built you know, a bank, basically, a bankroll to let him invest into these two groups, which will later become Swatch. So I'm start referring to these two groups as the Swatch group. So in the early days of the Swatch group, you had the Swatch watch making great money. So he's pouring this money back into these different brands, and he's consolidating, and brands that he needs to, you know, close down, he closes down. His main focus was to keep the talent of the Swiss industry together. There were so many talented watchmakers. He didn't want them, you know, going somewhere. He didn't want them to be demoralized because of layoffs. So the real genius of the Swatch watch is that he went where other, you know, big guys in the industry did not want to go, but he used that money to go back into these high-end watchmakers and pay those employees and keep those important employees in that industry. Because remember, if you're a high-end watchmaker or high-end watch designer, engineer, you can do so many different things in the mechanical engineering realm. A really interesting point is Omega. He goes into Omega. Omega at the time is making over 2,000 different models, right? So imagine they're just, all the resources are spread across these 2,000 different models. So he does an in-depth analysis of these 2,000 models. He realized all the revenue is only coming in from about 15% of these 2,000 references. So he goes in there and he scraps a majority. It goes from 2,000 to about 130 models. And this is important because what he did with Omega, he replicated throughout a lot of the businesses. You cut away the fat, you focus on what people want, and you don't try to shove things down their throat that they're really not paying attention to. Another important thing he did is centralize the manufacturing of a lot of the parts. So what he did was he let every brand have their own kind of, you know, executive structure, but when it came to the supply chain, everybody's product was being made or partly made in the same facilities to kind of streamline everything and make everything a little more automated and able to scale a little bit. He was a visionary who really said, like, hey, we have to kind of do things a different way if we're gonna survive in this new, you know, environment and economy that we have going. So the thing about Nicolas Hayek, he had this engineering background, and he was a businessman. He was a little bit crazy, right? And that is the mixture that you needed because he had no fear. He, you know, was outside of the Swiss system and loved the Swiss system, but he was still somebody who didn't believe that we have to stay on this historical path, that we could still have some innovation, some fun. You know, there are a lot of very, very smart people in the world, and there are a lot of very technical, adept people, and there are a lot of creative people. Very rare do you have somebody who has all of those features mixed in and who also has the will to do something. Right, and that's the real key, that he had the will to stand up, to convince people to spend their money on an industry that was dying. He was a person who got that 18-wheeler from going on this deep, straight up dive, and he built a ramp. And he slowly, watch by watch, built a ramp that helped this 18-wheeler come back up the hill, and now they're back on the highway. And now they're cautious now when they see sharp turns coming. They're a little bit more cautious, and we're willing to use the brakes, and everybody's looking out versus just being focused and just pressing the gas. And that's why I think Nicolas Hayek was one of the most impactful people in the watchmaking industry. If you like this video, feel free to DM me down below. If you want to talk about Nicolas Hayek or anything in watchmaking world, I'm always down to chat. If you like my video, please let me know. Feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. Definitely check out my other videos and many more coming soon.